Well, in Chapter 2, we're going to look at the need for fire prevention as an extension of what we learned about the historical fires. Over time, we've realized how important fire prevention is. Our learning objectives today are listed out here. There's 11 of them. But we are going to talk about America burning, fire codes, governmental issues on fire inspections. We're going to explain the roles and benefits of civil service inspectors versus civilian inspectors. We're going to explain the role of private inspectors, bad idea, company officer in the part of inspecting, and we're going to talk about the basic qualifications for being an inspector and doing inspections. So, the importance of a fire prevention program is seen in the fact that in America we have so many fires. Back in the 1970s, we'll talk about that in a couple of slides, we realized that America was one of the worst countries in the world for fires. And here we're a first world country, and yet we were one of the worst. So now, fire prevention and code enforcement's become a big part of what fire departments are all about, but it hasn't always been that way. So, where do most people die by fire? Well, most of them in 1 and 2 family homes and in multifamily apartments. Some are in businesses, but a lot of them are in the homes. We've known about this danger that we have and the problems we have with fire for a very long time. I mean, the first major conflagration was back in 1608 when Jamestown burned to the ground. We've had destructive fires that over all of the years in these conflagrations we talked about. Well, why did they happen? They happen because of carelessness. People are just doing a bad job or not paying attention to what they're doing. Shoddy work on construction where electrical isn't done right and things like that. Apathy, well, that's a big one. Everybody thinks it won't happen to them, and they just don't care. They don't care to be careful. And the last one is ignorance. Now remember, ignorance isn't the same as stupid. When you say that somebody is ignorant, it just means they don't know. And there is a lot of ignorance out there. A lot of people don't know. You don't put ammonia as a cleanser in the toilet and then realize it's not cutting it and then add bleach to it. If you do that, you've made a poisonous gas. So a lot of people don't know things. So what can we do? What can we do to improve this problem? Well, back in the 1970s, President Nixon realized that we have a really big problem, and he put together a commission called the National Commission on Fire Prevention and Control, and he asked them to investigate and put together a report on our fire problem in America. And it was called America Burning, the report that they put out. And this commission got statistics and stories from all across America, looked at the history, and realized we have a really big problem. So there have been multiple follow-up reports since then, and when I do this class in person, I have all the students look at all of these reports, but you can see a picture here. And there was a report during the Bush administration. I believe the other one was during Clinton's administration. I'm not sure. But there have been at least 3, if not 4, follow-ups. So what America Burning, or why it was initiated, was we realized as a first world country, we had the largest fire loss, the largest death rate, and things were out of control. In fact, we were having massive economic losses. So we needed to stop this harm to people, businesses, and to our whole country that were being caused by fire. So America Burning looked at uh, the statistics and all of that, and they came up with some of the reasons why they thought we have such a problem in America. And, some of the things I mentioned: ignorance, apathy, carelessness, all of that. But they specifically pointed out that our work environments have many unnecessary hazards, um, and that our businesses are going unmonitored as to their safety practices. So, as a result, fire prevention, OSHA, and many other organizations have been given more inspection powers since America Burning. And they also realize that we need more improvement on our fire protection features, sprinklers, alarms, and things of this nature. Some of the other elements that were identified was: we need more emphasis on fire prevention. We need to make sure that our fire service across the nation gets better training and better education. And not only our firefighters, but all Americans need to be educated. So many education programs have come out of America Burning. Well, what were the direct results? The direct results of America Burning and its follow-up studies is the establishment of the U.S. Fire Administration, the USFA. The U.S. Fire Administration is under FEMA now. Didn't used to be, but it is since the 9/11 event and the reorg of Homeland Security and FEMA. Under the U.S. Fire Administration, they established the National Fire Academy, a place for firefighters to come from all over the United States to get education, and a place where now we have online courses, and they have extension courses that go all throughout the United States. They are the main source of education for the U.S. They also established FESHI. FESHI is the Fire and Emergency Services Fire and Emergency Services Higher Education. I'm sorry, I had a little brain fart there. Fire and Emergency Services Higher Education. So FESHI sets forth the standards for education for this very class. If you want to get a fire tech degree, an associate's degree in fire technology, FESHI has set forth the pattern for what's required to have that degree. And they've set forth the standards for every class within that degree. So this class is based on the standards that FESHI has set forth for us. Not only did America Burning do a lot with organizing the education and the USFA and all of this stuff, but they started providing funding for training, for equipment, and for further studies. Now, since then, a lot of progress has been made. The statistics have got better, but more needs to be done, especially in the area of fire prevention. And there's been a paradigm shift, but we need more of a paradigm shift from response to prevention. So, why is the U.S. still ranked so low in fire prevention in spite of America Burning? Well, apathy plays a part. Americans just like to do their own thing, and we're a little indifferent, and we really, really, really believe it won't happen to me. Until you get in a car accident, you think you can drive like a race car driver. And, just recently, some guy driving like a race car driver up near where I live in San Francisco Canyon was racing to work, passed on a corner, ran into a lady head on, and killed both himself and the lady who was just driving home. And it's just, we're indifferent. We think we can get away with everything. And we have to realize that this is a real problem and we all need to play a part for the solution. Fire chiefs need to support fire prevention more. The politicians, they like to pay the money for the red lights and sirens, but it's hard to measure prevention and to prove that it's worth the money. But in reality, we have been proving it. Another problem in America is we have that insurance mentality. Well, that's why I have insurance. If my house burns down, that's why I have insurance. None of these things are good. So what's the answer? How can we improve the American problem even more than's already been done? We need better inspectors and better company officers and better firefighters who all see the need for fire prevention. We all need to see the other 3 E's of fire prevention about ourselves. We talked about engineering, education, and enforcement. Well, each inspector and company officer, every firefighter needs to see themselves as an emissary, an ambassador of their city and their fire department. That every word they say, everything they do, every attitude they show is a reflection on the fire department and our attitude of taking this very seriously. Secondly, we need to be educators. We need to understand the problem and the solutions and take every opportunity to educate the public and to assist the customers or the occupants to understand and enact good fire prevention practices. Lastly, we need to be enforcers. We need to take seriously the deputization that has been put on us, the delegation of authority from the fire code and from the state fire marshal and our state government. We have an obligation to enforce the code, to represent our departments well, and to protect our community. We need to do it in a fair and unbiased manner for the good of the community. Some of the important lessons for inspectors and company officers is that they need to realize that their identifying and correcting hazards is going to improve safety. And they're going to in doing that, they're protecting their citizens, they're protecting the economy, they're protecting their fire crews, they're also helping on saving on worker comp claims and insurance claims. This is all good. So we all need to do our part. So what are some of the critical fire prevention functions? Well, what we do is strategic planning for our communities, and that's where we do that engineering, and that involves prevention right there. Strive to prevent more than respond. We're trying to get that attitude out there. We want to get firefighters out there pre-planning for fires, looking at the businesses in their areas, looking at their district. When we get out and do fire inspections, it's good for firefighters to see the buildings and what's inside. If you were to close your eyes right now and, maybe you should do that. Just close your eyes for a second and picture your best friend from childhood, back in your elementary school or junior high school days, your best friend's house. Can you close your eyes and still see it? Can you see their living room, what their kitchen looks like, and maybe their bedroom if you spent the night? Do you remember what it looks like? Well, your brain has the ability to hold these things and retain these things. Well, it's the same thing when we go in the businesses in our district. We may not remember it in detail, but we've got a picture of it in our brain. And when we get in those buildings in a fire, that's going to help us in knowing how to fight the fire and how to escape if we get in a problem. Also in fire prevention, we're doing hazard identification. We're finding out what are our high-risk businesses in our area. Where I live, there's a chlorine plant. And most people don't know that this is a very, very dangerous facility in our community. If they had a chlorine leak, everybody downwind would die. It'd just be that simple. So, as firefighters, we need to know about those kind of places in our community. And lastly, we have the function of educating the public. We've talked about that a lot. So, what are the legal requirements for fire prevention? America Burning said we need more. Well, we have to have laws that make that happen. So, there are a lot of legal requirements for the inspectors and for the prevention department. Inspectors need to know that there's jurisdictional authority issues. And jurisdictional authority we'll talk about in a second, but it's not just place. It's not just the boundaries of Ventura County or Ventura City or LA County or city. It has to do with processes and occupancy types. For instance, OSHA has jurisdictional authority over the workplace. The EPA has jurisdictional authority over environmental issues. So sometimes jurisdictional authority has to do with what you're doing, not just where you are. We need to know the adopted ordinances. One of the hard things for inspectors is to get familiar with the codes because there's a lot of codes. We're going to talk about that in a second. And we need to know local codes like city charters and county codes, as well as the state regulations and even federal regulations. So, how do we get more proficient in these things? Training, training, training. We need to train our inspectors and get up to the qualification. This picture on the right is the U.S. Fire Administration's National Fire Academy. I got to go there when I was with LA County Fire, and it was a great experience, a great learning experience. It's quite a privilege to be there. You can't go there. In fact, I can't even go there anymore. I don't think. I might be able to go as an educator, but I can't go as a retired firefighter. You have to be an on-duty firefighter or a volunteer of some kind. I know that Gail Warner goes every once in a while, so maybe as educators we can go. But you as students can't go, but you can take extension courses from them online and get certifications. Coursework from colleges and other short courses can get you training. State Fire Marshal, that's what SFM stands for. State Fire Marshal courses can be taken, National Fire Academy courses. Most fire departments provide in-service training. I took a lot of that when I was in fire prevention. We also need a heavy reliance on trade knowledge. I was a former hazmatter, and that hazmat experience helped me in being a better inspector. The NFPA sets up standards for inspectors, level 1, 2, and 3, and those are all laid out in NFPA standard number 1031. But whatever the method, you need to become a master of your craft and learn about what all is involved and what laws apply. So as we're talking about jurisdictional authority, it always reminds me of what if you were pulling into the Ventura Mall or that one up in Calabasas area or whatever? You're pulling into the mall and you're driving through the parking lot trying to find a spot, and you kind of do a California stop through this little stop sign. And you just kind of cruise through it. Nobody was coming, so you think you're just fine. And it's a parking lot. And as you're driving down looking for a parking spot, all of a sudden you look in your rearview mirror and here's Paul Blart, mall cop, following you. And he's got that little light going around. And you find a parking spot and he pulls up behind you and he gets out with his swagger and he walks up and he goes, "I'll be seeing your license, please." And what are you going to say to him? Well, I'm going to say, "Hey, pound sand, Paul. You have no authority over me. You have no jurisdictional authority. You're a mall cop. Come on." You see, what could he do, really? He could kick me off the property. Well, do you think when I wrote my letter to the owners of the mall and complained about him that I was on my way to buy a $2,500 Apple computer and some mall cop kicked me off the property because I cruised through a stop sign? Do you think they'll let him keep his job? No. They'll fire him. Why? Because he was outside of his authority. The same with if some CHP from California pulls you over in Nevada. He has no authority unless you started speeding in California and then drove into Nevada. He can follow you in and call the Nevada State Troopers for help. But he doesn't have authority outside of California. That's the point. And the same here. You have to know the laws and where you can enforce them. Jurisdictional boundaries are important. So often, sometimes the local fire departments aren't going to enforce county or state regulations, and some do. We did in LA County Fire Department. My experience was I had to know the state code really well as the California State Fire Marshal's regulations. But even if you don't, if you see a hazard, you can't walk by it, especially if it's not in your jurisdiction. Like I see a building problem, I have a responsibility to notify the building official. If I notice that in this place that I'm inspecting, they sure have a lot of stuff that looks like they're cooking crystal meth, yeah, I have an obligation to tell the police department that on my inspection I noticed a lot of weird stuff. We make referrals and we make reports, but we need to know our local laws, our local regulations, and where they apply and where they don't. You see, fire codes are both a state and a local responsibility, and the codes define for inspectors their duty, their responsibility, where they have authority, because that authority it's delegated to them, or it's a deputation process. And I think I mentioned that before, but the state fire marshal gives the authority to the fire chiefs of the different departments, and they give that authority down to every firefighter by when we swear an oath. So our job is to, on the job, enforce the code. When we're off duty, we don't have that authority. Now, there are two major codes that inspectors use in California. The first one is the Fire Code, Title 24, Part 9, and that applies throughout the state wherever it's been adopted. Now, the State Fire Marshal's Code is Title 19, and that applies wherever the fire marshal has authority. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the next PowerPoint in Chapter 3. So there's many different kinds of codes, not just those two major ones, but there's standards, there's regulations, there's statutes, there's policies, local policy, local guidelines. So we have to be familiar with all of that as we become more proficient as fire inspectors. So going back to what I mentioned before, when it comes to state regulations, we realize that the governor and the state legislature has given to the state fire marshal authority over certain occupancies and certain processes. So these state regulations only apply in assemblies, educations, institutions like listed down below, healthcare facilities, facilities for the physically or mentally challenged, or prisons, and residences, but not your home. Hotels and motels and condos or dormitories at colleges, things like that. The state also has authority over explosives, hazardous materials. And then there are other state agencies that have authority over employee safety, like Cal OSHA and low income and subsidized housing and things like that. Those are usually under the authority of states. Now, the states have a lot of authority, but the federals have more. There are federally enacted laws out there that have to be enforced at a local level. Now, they can supersede similar state laws. They can also be supportive of state laws as long as they don't conflict. Now, here's the deal though. Federally enacted laws can overshadow state laws unless the state can only become more restrictive. So I said that wrong. Federal laws can be overshadowed if state laws are more restrictive. Okay, that's the better way to say it. So if the federal government says we're going to make any school that has 1,000 or more students, we're going to require that they all have fire sprinklers. And that has to be enforced throughout the whole United States. Now, every state, everywhere, right? It's a federal law. But can California change that law? Well, they can't make it more lenient, but they can make it more restrictive. So they can say, here in California, if you've got a school that has 500 students or more, we require fire sprinklers. Now, what about here in Ventura County or my old jurisdiction, LA County? Can we change that law? Yes, we can, only if we make it more restrictive. So in Ventura County, we can say any school with 250 students or more must have fire sprinklers. So the federal regulations that are out there involve agencies like OSHA, Health Department, EPA, and of course the U.S. Fire Administration. Another thing we need to know is that federal properties, I can go by and pre-plan them in case of fire, but I cannot inspect them and enforce local laws. They're exempt from local laws. They have their own inspectors. They have their own rules. The federal government gets to do whatever they darn well please because they're big and they're powerful, and they got the Army and the Marines and the Navy and all of those guys on their side. So don't mess with them. Just do what they say, right? So federal properties are exempt from local laws. I believe Captain Cataley worked in the area where the FBI building was for a while, and they could ask to go in, but they probably weren't going to get to go in, and they were not allowed to inspect there, or the VA, the Veterans Administration down there in Westwood. So they might seek input from us, but they don't have to comply. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of inspectors as we develop our fire prevention bureaus. And the most common is civil service sworn inspectors. In other words, firefighters that become inspectors. They provide tremendous knowledge and experience that they bring in because they've already been working as firefighters. They also relate better with the firefighters. They're great ambassadors to the fire line. But most firefighters don't want to be inspectors. They're not always interested in this assignment. And they cost more. Your firefighters are some of the most expensive employees in the city and county, and as well as your police. So usually, most firefighters go into fire prevention for a short duty. They might get promoted in there, or they might go in while their kids are on some sports team and they want to work a 40-hour work week for a while, but they don't like to stay. So unfortunately, that's one of the problems with civil service sworn inspectors is they're in their positions just for a short while, and usually then they want out. The other option is to use civilian inspectors, and that's what Ventura County does. Some of you may have taken a class with Masood, who teaches, I believe it's 105, the Fire Protection Systems class, and he is our local fire marshal for the county of Ventura, and he's over all of our civilian inspectors, and they're all civilian. So the benefits of civilian inspectors is they're long-term. They usually get hired somewhere in their 20s or 30s, and they stay for a whole career. They're easier to manage based on the policies and the regulations. They don't cost anywhere near as much as the sworn civil servants. Now, the downside is they may lack fire service experience, and there are limited promotional opportunities. There aren't as many positions within the Fire Prevention Bureau to work your way up. Um, so there's some downsides to it, but if you ask me, this is the fire prevention of the future. Ventura County is doing a very smart thing. It's economical, it works well, and more we're going to see fire departments switching to civilian fire inspectors because it makes more sense economically and over the long run. Now, some fire departments and some cities want to try and use private inspectors. Now, the problem with private inspectors is they're profit motivated. Now, some of them have very high qualifications. They're sometimes ex firefighters or ex fire inspectors, but they're expensive. And they get hired in and they're transient and then they go away. Some fire prevention bureaus are choosing to privatize because it's cheaper and it's more flexible. But here's the problem: they don't necessarily have as much accountability, and the employees aren't going to be paid as much and are a little bit more vulnerable to bribes and to graft. Outsourcing them can also be transient due to business cycles, the ups and downs of the economy. But here's the bottom line: why privatization is a really, really bad idea. How can a for profit business give the same service for a lower price and still make a profit? It just doesn't make sense. Government provided fire prevention is way better. It's cheaper in the long run and you get a better service. So, what are we going to do as we develop our fire prevention bureaus? Well, company inspection programs need to involve risk assessment, whether it's done by a fire prevention inspector or from a local fire company. We need to get out there and assess the risks in our areas. We need to pre-plan the buildings that are in our area. We need to go out and do fire and life safety education. We need to investigate fires. This is what fire prevention bureaus do. We also provide standby fire and life safety duties. If something is happening that's out of the ordinary, like a big, huge concert in a place that's not normally used for concerts, or let's say we're having car races or a hot air balloon, a big show of hot air balloons or something like that. What they usually do is they hire or they pay the fire department to provide fire safety officers. This is something that I do on my spare time. I'm a fire safety officer for the film industry. And we'll talk about that later in the semester. But I go out and keep an eye on them while they're filming and make sure that they don't blow anybody up or hurt anybody when they're filming. So this is something that we do, and then also the fire companies get out and do inspections. So we do risk assessment, as I said. This means that we go out and we look for future problems. Where's the hazards? Where's the target hazards? Where's our really serious problems? And then we prioritize them and determine how to mitigate these problems and pre-plan for how we'll react if there's a fire. And all of this is based on multiple things: the previous run history and the types of occupancies. Assemblies have more people, factories have more hazardous processes, and so we categorize them. Then we need to do pre-incident planning, as I mentioned before, pre-planning the target hazards and the high-risk hazards, looking at the critical buildings and how can we minimize problems there, and how will we fight fire if we do have a problem there. We're also going to do as much fire and life safety education as we can. We're going to use every public encounter to teach informally. I love to do this and explain to people why we do what we do. And I always try to convince the owners of businesses, especially, you go in some businesses, if they're owned by people who are immigrants, they come from other parts of the world where when a government official comes in, they're used to, oh, that means I got to pay. And there's a lot of blackmail and stuff like that. Well, I want to change their perception. I go in and try and make them realize I'm there to help them. I'm their ally. I want to save them money. Yeah, they might have to spend some money to fix things and make them more safe. But if you have a problem, it's going to cost you a lot more money. So I want to go out there and promote fire safety and promote our fire department, promote firefighters, and keep that goodwill out there. Fire prevention also does fire investigations. Since the fire department's first on scene, we have access to the most critical information during those first few minutes of the fire. And the fire companies are going to help us with that. And then we bring in the professionals, guys that are in the Fire Prevention Bureau that all they do is fire investigation. So they're going to observe and analyze all of this stuff to find out, what's the origin of this fire? Was it just an electrical problem, or did somebody light this fire? If it's an arson, then we might need to be building a case. And as I mentioned before, we might do those standby fire and life safety duties. I did this a lot when I was on the job. When you are doing it as an on-the-job firefighter, the department charges them money to send firefighters out. LA County charges like $175 an hour. Now, the firefighter doesn't make that money, but whether it's some concert promoter or whatever, they have to pay the county for firefighters to be there. And it's per firefighter. So, if you have to have 2 or 3 firefighters, that's a lot of money per hour. But those fire and life safety duties, though, what they involve is watching, being a fire watch, making sure that everything is being done correctly, doing a pre-incident plan, having an evacuation plan, and overseeing that whole process. So as I said before, I do that for the film industry, and you have to realize that a lot of times some things happen, and they happen quickly and unexpectedly. And if you're there as a cool head who can jump on the situation and get things going in the right direction, get the fire department called. In fact, for instance, one of the first things I tell them when I get there is, hey, if we have somebody injured, if we have a problem, contact me right away. Don't call 911, I'll call, because I have a direct line to the fire department, and we skip all the rigmarole that you got to go through when you first call 911, and we'll get a faster response. So how does this all come down to the company level? Well, the role of the company officers in fire prevention is to work with the Fire Prevention Bureau and be familiar with our department's operations. To each captain needs to convince their crew and be vested in protecting their community, have a vested interest in your community. Interact with the public, both in education and in just whenever you go on a run. Treat, when you go on a grandma, treat her like she's your grandma. Treat people the way you want to be treated. The fire company, the fire officers in our fire department are the role model for the lower rank and file. I had captains who would literally drive by buildings and then write in the book that they did fire prevention there. And that's a really bad example to be setting. I also had one captain early in my career who was out of fire prevention, and he did an amazing job of fire prevention, and I just admired him so much. And I tried to emulate him instead of some of these other bozos that pretended to do it but really didn't. As each company officer embraces fire prevention, then it enables our department to maximize our efforts towards fire and life safety. So lastly, part of our company officers need to realize that fire prevention is part of their responsibility. It's an expectation. So whether it's the Fire Prevention Bureau and the inspectors, or every firefighter on the line, and especially our captains, we need to realize it's our responsibility. Safety is each person's responsibility. The inspections themselves are kind of easy, and the more you know, the better it's going to get, the easier to do the inspections. But we need to get out there, convey the information, gain compliance, and do this in a way that reflects well on our department and brings about a safer environment. Now, this requires some finesse and skill and diplomacy and understanding of the code. It takes time, but if you invest the time and you do the things that we've been talking about in this class and will talk about, you'll be a better inspector and your community be a safer place. So thanks for listening. And there are no projects in this chapter. Yahoo! But make sure that you get the quiz for chapters 1 and 2 done. If you haven't got your book by now, you better get it, because all the answers are in the book.